When I first opened Sergei Tarmashev's Darkness Book 1, I wasn't struck by explosions, ruins, or scenes of global collapse. What hit me was something quieter, deeper, and far more unsettling. It was the feeling that the world described in the book wasn't just fiction. It felt like a distorted reflection of our own reality. A world standing on the same fragile edge, pretending everything is fine while the ground is already cracking underneath. Now, years later, returning to this novel with different eyes, I understand why it stayed in my mind. Darkness isn't simply a sci-fi story. It's not just post-apocalyptic entertainment. It's a warning wrapped in narrative, a slow, creeping anxiety made into a world, a meditation on collapse, on ignorance, and on the terrifying idea that humanity often notices danger only when it's already too late. But to explore its philosophy, its psychological weight, and its symbolic layers, we have to start from the beginning, from the world Tarmashev builds from the very first chapter, a world not destroyed by a single catastrophe, but eroded by thousands of small cracks. What struck me immediately is how softly the novel begins. There's no dramatic opening, no sudden apocalypse, no catastrophic event that shatters the world in one moment. Instead, Tarmashev guides the reader toward the edge carefully, almost gently. The tension is subtle at first, like a quiet vibration just beneath the surface. The world he describes is already wounded, already weakened, already unsteady, but people in it behave as if nothing irreversible has happened. Society clings to its routines. Governments pretend to be in control. The military continues its operations. Life goes on, held together more by inertia than stability. This subtle approach makes the atmosphere terrifying. The end isn't something that happens. It's something that has been happening for a very long time. When I first read this, I recognized a familiar feeling, the kind we sense when watching the real world. Environmental crises that we pretend aren't serious, political instability that we ignore, technological risk we brush aside, problems that grow slowly until they suddenly look impossible to solve. And this is where the novel hits hard. Tarmashev doesn't show us the moment of collapse. He shows us the moment humanity can no longer hide from the collapse that has been building for decades. One of the most disturbing parts of the book is the nature of the ruined world. It's not broken by one event. There is no convenient explanation, no single villain, no earthquake, no war, no monstrous accident. Instead, destruction in darkness is layered, complex, and frighteningly believable. The world suffers from ecological collapse, political corruption, technological instability, social degradation, and on top of all that, a mysterious, incomprehensible threat. This makes the book feel more like a grim prophecy than fiction, because real civilizations rarely fall because of one big disaster. They fall because of many small ones, each ignored, each neglected, until the system finally crumbles. Reading the novel again, I realized how intentionally this decay is written. It's not the kind of destruction you see in Hollywood movies. It's the quiet kind, the creeping kind, the inevitable kind, the kind of decay that feels familiar. From the earliest chapters, the book creates a sense of danger that's difficult to put into words. It's not loud, it's not direct, it doesn't scream. Instead, it whispers. The threat in darkness feels like a low-frequency hum behind everything. A tension that exists in the background even when characters are doing ordinary things. Tarmashev builds this atmosphere through small details, strange silences, abandoned territories, guarded secrets, the behavior of military units that clearly know more than they're allowed to say. There are scenes where nothing explicitly horrifying happens, but every detail suggests something is wrong. The world feels watched, monitored, examined by something invisible, something patient. And that patience is what makes it terrifying. Most stories portray danger as sudden and violent. Here, danger is gradual, slow, deliberate. It feels like a wave that has already swallowed the horizon but hasn't yet touched your feet. This subtle tension made a deep impression on me when I first read the book. It's rare to find a story where atmosphere speaks louder than action, where silence is more frightening than screams, where the unknown is more threatening than the known. One of the strongest themes in the novel is denial. Humanity in darkness lives in a world that is clearly falling apart, yet continues to behave as if everything is under control. It's a world where people have adapted to crisis rather than solving it. A world where survival becomes routine. This resonated with me on a personal level. We often live exactly the same way, pretending that the problems we see every day aren't fatal. We get used to things we should never accept. Pollution becomes normal. Political instability becomes normal. Economic inequality becomes normal. Everyday stress becomes normal. We adapt. We ignore. We pretend. And this normalization of decay is exactly what Tarmashev captures. At times, the book feels almost documentary, not because the events are real, but because the emotional truth behind them is. It raises an uncomfortable question. How much collapse can a society absorb before people finally admit the collapse is happening? Even in the early chapters, before the real horror begins, the characters feel shaped by the world they inhabit. They are worn down not by a single tragedy, but by many small ones. Their emotional landscape reflects the ruined physical one. Soldiers in the book don't behave like traditional action heroes. They aren't fearless warriors. Many of them are tired, skeptical, frustrated, or hardened by past operations. They feel real, flawed, human, and painfully aware of their limitations. Civilians, too, seem caught between anxiety and apathy. Some hope for change. Others simply endure. It feels like everyone in the book carries invisible scars. This is what I appreciate about Tarmashev's writing. He doesn't present a clean-cut picture of good versus evil. Instead, he shows people forced to live in a world that has already taken too much from them. Their motivations are practical. Their fears are understandable. Their reactions feel genuine. All of this strengthens the sense that the world of darkness is not just a setting, but a character itself. A wounded, dying character that affects everyone living inside it. Even before the readers see the full manifestation of the mysterious force known as the darkness, its presence is already felt. It appears in rumors, classified reports, unexplained disappearances, and subtle signals that something unnatural is spreading beneath the surface of reality. Tarmashev balances this mystery skillfully. He gives readers just enough information to feel intrigued and uneasy, but not enough to fully understand the threat. The unknown becomes a shadow over the entire narrative. This is where the psychological aspect of the novel becomes especially powerful. Humans fear what they cannot comprehend. Fear grows in silence, in absence, in uncertainty. And the novel uses this brilliantly. The darkness doesn't need to appear physically to terrify the reader. Its presence is already enough to poison the atmosphere. This mirrors real life in an unsettling way. Often what we fear most isn't the disaster itself, but the anticipation of it, the possibility, the unknown. As the story progresses, one of the first major victims of the changing world is trust. Trust in governments, trust in institutions, trust in information, trust in each other. Characters often find themselves questioning who is withholding the truth, why authorities behave strangely, what the military actually knows, and why so many warnings go ignored. This breakdown of trust is one of the scariest parts of the book, because trust is the foundation of every functioning society. Once it disappears, chaos doesn't erupt. It simply spreads quietly, like mold in the walls of a house. And again, this reflects reality chillingly well. We live in a time where misinformation, secrecy, and doubt shape our worldview more than facts. We live in a time where trust is fragile. Tarmashev uses this fragility as one of the building blocks of his dystopia. Rereading the book, I realized how philosophical it really is. Not in a preachy, direct way, but in the way it shows consequences, actions, patterns, the long-term effects of human arrogance and ignorance. The world in darkness is an ecosystem of mistakes, humanity's scientific ambition without restraint, environmental destruction justified by profit, political decisions made for power rather than survival, social collapse caused by indifference, and finally something ancient and incomprehensible awakening because the world has weakened itself. It's as if the universe in the book is saying, humanity had many chances. It chose not to learn. So now the bill has come due. This idea becomes one of the central themes of the novel and one of the reasons the book feels more like a warning than entertainment. The first part of Darkness might seem slow to readers expecting immediate action, But this slow burn is essential. It creates a foundation of realism, tension, and immersion that makes the later events far more impactful. By the time the real horror appears, we already feel emotionally invested. We already understand the world. We already see the cracks. We already fear what's coming. And that fear is earned. When the darkness finally reveals itself, it doesn't feel like an invading monster or an external threat. It feels like something the world has invited in, something the world created space for through its negligence. The early chapters of Darkness build an extraordinary atmosphere, one that combines realism, philosophy, and subtle dread. It's a portrayal of a collapsing civilization that feels eerily familiar, and a study of human denial in the face of slow-moving disaster. This is why, even before the true antagonist appears, the book is already frightening. The horror doesn't come from the darkness. It comes from the realization that humanity itself opened the door. As the story moves deeper into its second phase, the tone of Darkness begins to shift. The quiet unease that dominated the beginning slowly transforms into something sharper, heavier, and more focused. The world no longer feels like it is simply decaying. It begins to feel hunted, watched, surrounded by something that everyone senses, yet no one can describe. And this is where the military enters the spotlight, bringing with it a new kind of tension, one built not on fear of the unknown, but on fear of suppressed truth. The soldiers and special units in Darkness are not portrayed as invincible heroes. They are professionals, disciplined and competent, yet still human. They carry out orders without fully understanding the threat they are being sent to confront. This creates a strong sense of realism. The military in this novel is not a monolithic force of certainty, but a collection of individuals forced to operate in environments where logic no longer applies. They see things they cannot explain. They find evidence that contradicts official briefings, and slowly they begin to realize that someone, somewhere, is hiding the truth. This dynamic creates a powerful narrative tension. When trained professionals, people conditioned to remain calm under fire, begin to express doubt, suspicion, and fear, it amplifies the reader's own anxiety. It becomes clear that if the military cannot understand what they are facing, civilians stand no chance at all. The novel portrays military secrecy in a particularly haunting way. There are mentions of classified reports, intercepted communications, mysterious disappearances of entire units, and operations that are never publicly acknowledged. Soldiers receive orders that make no sense, are deployed to areas with no strategic value, and are instructed to retrieve objects or samples that they do not understand. The secrecy is suffocating, and the soldiers feel it. They know they are being used as tools in a game whose rules they cannot see. This leads to one of the most important themes of this part of the story: the fragility of human perception when confronted with something outside the boundaries of experience. Humans rely on logic and training to navigate danger. But what happens when logic fails? When training becomes irrelevant? When the enemy does not follow the rules of nature? This psychological unraveling begins quietly but steadily spreads across the ranks. There is a particularly striking moment early in Part 2 when soldiers encounter traces of something that cannot be classified in any known biological category. They do not see the darkness directly, but they see the aftermath. Something has passed through the area, leaving behind a scene that defies comprehension. Structures that should be intact are partially dissolved. Organic matter behaves in ways that violate biological principles. Shadows appear where no light source exists. And most disturbing of all, the environment feels wrong. The atmosphere carries a pressure, a sense of presence, as if the air itself is observing them. These scenes emphasize the idea that the darkness is not just a physical force, but a conceptual one. It distorts perception, challenges reality, and undermines the foundational rules of existence. The military in Darkness is essentially blind. They walk into missions assuming they understand the world, only to discover they are operating in a place where the world has already changed. As soldiers begin to record their findings, patterns emerge, patterns the authorities desperately try to suppress. Reports are rewritten, evidence disappears, surveillance footage is confiscated, witnesses are reassigned or silenced. This strategic concealment of information adds another layer of horror. Readers realize that the darkness is not the only enemy. Human secrecy, human pride, and human arrogance are just as dangerous. The refusal to acknowledge the truth becomes a catalyst for greater disaster. The philosophical weight of this part of the novel grows with every chapter. The question shifts from, what is the darkness, to why won't anyone admit what is happening? The institutions meant to protect society, government agencies, scientific organizations, military leadership become obstacles to survival because they refuse to abandon the illusion of control. They cling to outdated frameworks, trying to interpret the incomprehensible through the lens of conventional science and politics. And in doing so, they worsen the situation. This resonates strongly with the real world. History is filled with examples where authorities ignored early warnings because the truth was politically or socially inconvenient. From ecological disasters to pandemics to technological risks, humanity often refuses to act until catastrophe is undeniable. Tarmashev captures this psychological pattern with chilling accuracy. As operations continue, we see the soldiers gradually change. Some grow paranoid, others become numb. A few develop a cold, analytical detachment as a way to cope. But underneath the surface, all of them carry the same emotional burden. The knowledge that something terrible is coming, and that no one in power seems willing to take it seriously. One of the strongest scenes in this section involves a small recon team sent into a remote zone where reports of strange phenomena have increased. At first, everything seems normal, but as they advance, their instruments malfunction. GPS coordinates shift. Radios crackle with distorted voices that do not belong to any known channel. Visual distortions appear in the corners of their eyes. And the deeper they go, the more reality itself seems to twist. The team eventually encounters an environment where physics behaves unpredictably. Time feels inconsistent. Sound echoes unnaturally. Biological traces found on the ground are unlike anything cataloged by science. They document everything meticulously, but as they retreat, several members privately admit they do not believe their own recordings. Their minds reject what they witnessed. This raises another philosophical layer, the human mind's desperation to protect itself from the unknown. When confronted with something that does not fit into existing mental structures, people often ignore it, rationalize it, or forget it entirely. The darkness confronts humanity not just physically, but psychologically. It breaks the human ability to comprehend reality. Communication becomes strained. Soldiers begin to distrust their superiors. Scientists distrust their instruments. Civilians distrust government statements. A society without trust is a society at the brink of collapse. And this collapse begins quietly, exactly the way real civilizations crumble internally first, externally second. The novel uses the military as a microcosm of the larger world. Their confusion mirrors the world's confusion. Their fear mirrors society's fear. Their ignorance mirrors the ignorance enforced by the authorities. This makes their perspective emotionally powerful. They are trained to fight, yet they cannot identify their enemy. They are trained to observe, yet their senses fail. They are trained to follow orders, yet the orders no longer lead to safety. As secrecy intensifies, so does the sense of isolation. Units are deployed to dangerous zones with incomplete information. Some never return. Others return changed, quiet, hollow, unable to articulate what they experienced. A few go mad. This progression reveals the psychological cost of suppressing truth. The longer the world ignores the darkness, the stronger it becomes. The story also begins to hint at a more cosmic scale. The darkness is not simply a biological anomaly. It is not a virus, not a parasite, not a chemical phenomenon. It behaves with intention. It adapts. It studies. It manipulates the environment in ways that suggest awareness. This is what makes it terrifying. It is not just an unknown force, it is a presence. And as the reader, you slowly realize that humanity is not facing a natural disaster. It is facing something entirely outside the realm of earthly understanding. This is where the story transitions from a dystopian thriller into something closer to existential horror. The characters are forced to confront the possibility that humanity is not the dominant force on the planet. They are forced to confront the idea that the universe may contain entities or forces beyond comprehension. And most devastating of all, they are forced to confront the reality that humanity is not prepared. This part of the novel ends with a sense of urgency. The military begins to understand that the situation is far worse than anyone imagined, but their warnings are ignored. Their reports are buried, their missions continue, and the darkness continues to spread. The creeping dread becomes a countdown, even if no one recognizes it yet. The world is running out of time, and the forces meant to protect it are trapped in bureaucracy, pride, and denial. The reader knows that something catastrophic is coming, but the characters are still trapped in the illusion that the situation can be controlled. Part 2 of Darkness leaves us with one overwhelming impression. The most dangerous enemy is not the darkness itself, it is humanity's refusal to see it. As the narrative of Darkness continues, the confrontation with the unknown intensifies. The slow build of tension in the previous sections now gives way to tangible encounters with the incomprehensible. Yet Tarmashev maintains the novel's signature subtlety. The darkness is no longer merely an abstract threat or a mysterious force, felt only in the shadows. It begins to make itself known in ways that are both horrifying and intellectually unsettling. For the characters, this is the point of no return. For the reader, it is a moment of profound realization that the world they have been observing is far more fragile than they imagined. The early encounters with the darkness are not marked by explosive action or sudden attacks. Instead, they are psychological, sensory, and deeply disturbing. Soldiers and scientists report environments that behave contrary to natural laws. Structures bend, collapse, or shift without explanation. Shadows move independently of any light source. Sounds echo or vanish inexplicably. Time itself seems to fracture, with moments stretching unnaturally or compressing without warning. These subtle violations of reality create a constant sense of unease, forcing characters and readers alike to question the stability of the world around them. The novel excels in conveying this tension because the characters are deeply human. They are not archetypal heroes or invincible operatives. They are individuals with personal fears, doubts, and limitations. Their reactions to the darkness are varied. Some deny it, some rationalize it, and others succumb to panic or madness. This spectrum of responses reflects a central theme of the book. When faced with the truly incomprehensible, human psychology is both fragile and unpredictable. It is in these personal reactions that the story's philosophical depth emerges. Tarmashev also uses the encounters with the darkness to explore moral and ethical dilemmas. The characters are forced to make decisions under conditions where every choice is imperfect and every outcome uncertain. Military orders may lead to further destruction, scientific experiments may unleash new dangers, and individual survival often conflicts with the collective good. The narrative emphasizes that in a world governed by forces beyond understanding, traditional notions of right and wrong become inadequate. Ethical ambiguity permeates every action, creating a moral tension that heightens the novel's sense of dread. A key moment in Part 3 occurs when a reconnaissance team enters a sector that has already been partially overtaken by the darkness. The environment is distorted. Vegetation behaves unnaturally. Animals exhibit inexplicable behavior. Equipment fails without cause. Even the most experienced soldiers are disoriented, unable to rely on their senses or training. What follows is a study of human adaptability under extreme cognitive stress. Characters attempt to document, measure, and analyze the phenomena, but their tools and mental frameworks prove insufficient. They are forced to confront the limits of human knowledge. This confrontation extends beyond the purely physical into existential territory. The darkness challenges the assumption that humanity occupies a dominant or central role in the universe. Characters grapple with the possibility that their understanding of life, reality, and the natural order is profoundly limited. The novel asks implicit questions about humility, responsibility, and the arrogance of human civilization. If something as vast and incomprehensible exists, what obligations do humans have? And what consequences arise from their repeated failures to acknowledge limits? Psychologically, the presence of the darkness accelerates the breakdown of trust and communication. Teams begin to fragment under the strain of fear and uncertainty. Some individuals become paranoid, interpreting every shadow and sound as a threat. Others retreat into denial, pretending nothing unusual is occurring. Miscommunication spreads, compounded by the suppression of information from higher authorities who fail or refuse to disclose the full reality of the situation. This mirrors the real-world phenomenon of institutional failure under extreme conditions, emphasizing one of Tarmashev's central messages. Denial and ignorance amplify the impact of catastrophe. Throughout Part 3, the narrative also delves into the subtle ways in which the darkness manipulates perception. Characters see what may or may not be real. They hear voices that cannot exist. Memories seem altered. These experiences are not simply frightening. They force reflection on the very nature of reality and consciousness. Tarmashev invites readers to consider how limited human perception is and how vulnerable we are to forces beyond comprehension. The psychological tension is as important as the physical threat, highlighting the novel's sophisticated approach to horror and suspense. In parallel, Part 3 continues to explore the human and social consequences of prolonged exposure to the unknown. Civilians live in constant fear, aware of the growing threat but lacking the means to respond effectively. Governments maintain a facade of control while secretly acknowledging their own limitations. Scientists debate theoretical explanations but remain unable to test their hypotheses safely. Communities fragment as trust erodes and survival becomes a matter of improvisation rather than preparation. Tarmashev portrays a society on the edge of collapse, not through dramatic cataclysms, but through the cumulative effect of fear, uncertainty, and the unknowable. The novel's use of multiple perspectives enhances this effect. By shifting between the experiences of soldiers, scientists, and civilians, Tarmashev provides a comprehensive view of the societal impact of the darkness. Each perspective reveals different facets of the crisis, demonstrating how the incomprehensible can distort behavior, thought, and decision-making across diverse social strata. Readers are encouraged to empathize with a wide array of characters, each struggling with their own limitations, doubts, and moral dilemmas. A particularly striking sequence involves a joint military-scientific team entering a quarantine zone to investigate recent anomalies. What they encounter defies all predictive models. Natural laws seem inconsistent. Physical and biological processes appear corrupted. Members of the team document phenomena that challenge their fundamental understanding of reality, from spatial distortions to inexplicable energy fluctuations. The tension is compounded by the knowledge that their findings will likely be suppressed, as authorities fear public panic more than the danger itself. This dual threat, both physical and bureaucratic, creates a layered, sophisticated suspense unique to Tarmashev's narrative style. The psychological complexity of Part 3 reaches its peak as characters are forced to reconcile their empirical observations with the impossibility of understanding them. The darkness is not a mere external antagonist. It is a catalyst for internal conflict. Individuals question their own perception, sanity, and judgment. Some begin to doubt the reliability of memory itself. Others struggle to maintain professional detachment, realizing that the threat cannot be contained or predicted. This focus on the internal ramifications of encountering the unknown elevates the novel above conventional horror or military thriller genres. Philosophically, Part 3 interrogates the limits of human knowledge and power. Characters who were previously confident in their training and expertise are humbled by circumstances that defy conventional understanding. The narrative raises profound questions. How much control does humanity truly possess? How fragile is our perception of reality? To what extent are humans prepared for events or entities that exceed comprehension? Tarmashev never offers easy answers, but the tension generated by these questions drives both narrative momentum and intellectual engagement. By the conclusion of Part 3, the darkness has become a palpable force in the world. Characters have encountered evidence of its physical, psychological, and existential effects. The military has faced operational failure and moral ambiguity. Scientists have confronted the insufficiency of empirical methods. Civilians have endured uncertainty, fear, and a growing sense of isolation. Trust has eroded at every level, leaving a society primed for disintegration. The narrative emphasizes that recognition of the threat alone is insufficient. Meaningful response requires acknowledgement, coordination, and adaptation, all of which are lacking. This stage of the story establishes a critical foundation for the subsequent parts. The darkness is no longer an abstract menace. It has become a character in its own right. Its presence is a constant, shaping the behavior, decisions, and psychology of everyone it touches. The novel moves beyond traditional genre boundaries, blending elements of thriller, horror, philosophy, and speculative fiction into a cohesive and immersive experience. As Part 3 closes, the reader is left with a profound sense of unease. The immediate threat is only partially understood, and the implications of encountering something beyond comprehension are fully evident. The story prepares the ground for the escalation of events, which will be explored in the next part, where the philosophical, ethical, and psychological consequences of the darkness intersect with direct confrontation and high-stakes narrative developments. As darkness progresses into its fourth part, the stakes increase, and the consequences of earlier events become more immediate. The novel continues to explore the psychological, social, and philosophical ramifications of a world touched by forces beyond human comprehension. Characters who have been observers now find themselves active participants in events that challenge not only their survival skills, but also their understanding of reality itself. The sense of urgency escalates, yet Tarmashev maintains the narrative tension through a careful balance of subtle horror, intellectual inquiry, and human drama. In this section, the focus shifts toward direct encounters with phenomena that cannot be explained by conventional science. Small teams are dispatched into zones increasingly influenced by the darkness, and each mission reveals deeper anomalies. Structures deform in impossible ways, energy fields appear and disappear without explanation, and living organisms demonstrate behaviors that defy biology. The novel emphasizes that these events are not random. They exhibit patterns that suggest intelligence, strategy, or purpose. Characters begin to realize that the darkness is not merely chaotic, but deliberate in its influence. The human response to these events becomes a central theme in Part 4. Soldiers, scientists, and civilians alike struggle to process what they witness. Their reactions range from denial and rationalization to obsessive investigation and, in some cases, despair. Tarmashev portrays these responses with nuance, avoiding melodrama while highlighting the psychological cost of prolonged exposure to incomprehensible phenomena. Fear, uncertainty, and cognitive dissonance drive the narrative, underscoring how fragile human perception is when confronted with events that defy understanding. One of the most compelling sequences involves a scientific expedition into a heavily affected sector. The team encounters spatial distortions where distances and directions no longer correspond to measured reality. Objects appear to duplicate, vanish, or shift position inexplicably. Electronic instruments fail or display contradictory data. The explorers attempt to document their findings, but their records are fragmented, inconsistent, or corrupted. Tarmashev uses these moments to emphasize the limitations of human knowledge. The character's tools and methods are rendered inadequate by a force that operates outside the bounds of known physics. The narrative also deepens its exploration of social and institutional collapse. Government agencies continue to suppress or manipulate information, prioritizing the maintenance of public order over genuine understanding of the threat. Military operations are planned based on incomplete or misleading intelligence. Scientific research is constrained by secrecy and political interference. Civilians face growing anxiety and mistrust, as official communications fail to match their observations. Through these interconnected dynamics, Tarmashev portrays a society increasingly incapable of coordinated action, illustrating how institutional failure amplifies existential danger. Ethical questions emerge as characters confront dilemmas with no clear solution. Decisions regarding engagement with the darkness, allocation of resources, and protection of personnel are fraught with moral ambiguity. Traditional frameworks of right and wrong prove insufficient when outcomes are uncertain and consequences potentially catastrophic. Characters are forced to navigate a world where every choice carries risk and every failure has cascading effects. These dilemmas enhance the philosophical depth of the novel, encouraging readers to consider how humans act when confronted with forces they cannot control or fully comprehend. A pivotal aspect of Part 4 is the depiction of cumulative psychological stress. Individuals who have been repeatedly exposed to anomalous events exhibit symptoms of extreme cognitive strain. Some experience hallucinations or altered perceptions of time and space. Others show signs of acute paranoia or obsessive focus on interpreting patterns in the phenomena they encounter. Tarmashev uses these portrayals to examine the limits of human mental resilience, illustrating that the darkness impacts both the external world and the inner workings of the mind. In parallel, the novel continues to examine trust and communication. As anomalies increase in frequency and intensity, the reliability of hierarchical command structures deteriorates. Field teams often operate with incomplete directives, leading to tension, confusion, and conflict. Collaboration becomes essential, yet fragile, as individual interpretations of events diverge. This breakdown of coordination reinforces one of the core messages of the series. In the face of incomprehensible threats, human cohesion and trust are as critical as knowledge and technical skill. The darkness itself begins to manifest characteristics that challenge the character's understanding of life and intelligence. Unlike conventional antagonists, it does not behave predictably. It adapts to human strategies, exploits weaknesses in perception and judgment, and appears to observe its opponent's behavior. The novel presents these interactions subtly but effectively, creating a sense that the world itself is becoming an active participant in the unfolding events. Humanity is not merely confronting a threat, it is interacting with a force that shapes reality according to principles beyond comprehension. Scientific inquiry in Part 4 is both expanded and constrained. Researchers attempt to classify, measure, and predict the phenomena, but each method is limited by the nature of the darkness. Instruments fail, samples degrade or change unpredictably, and observational data contradicts itself. Tarmashev emphasizes that conventional science, while a powerful tool, is not universally applicable. Knowledge is provisional, contingent, and bounded by the assumptions inherent in human perception. This reinforces the novel's philosophical undercurrent. Humans must acknowledge the limitations of understanding in order to act wisely. The military's experience mirrors these challenges. Operations that should be straightforward become complex and dangerous. Troops encounter environmental hazards that defy anticipation. Equipment fails in inexplicable ways. Standard procedures prove inadequate. Through these depictions, Tarmashev underscores the vulnerability of human systems when confronted with forces beyond their conceptual or technical capacity. The narrative tension derives not from simple combat, but from the recognition that conventional methods cannot secure safety or control. As Part 4 progresses, the darkness begins to influence social structures more visibly. Communities are isolated, supply chains disrupted, and public order challenged by fear and uncertainty. Individuals react according to personal experience, often in ways that conflict with collective interest. Some attempt to hoard resources, others prioritize escape, while a few engage in acts of altruism despite risk. These behavioral patterns demonstrate the complexity of human adaptation under extreme stress and highlight the interplay between personal survival and societal stability. A recurring theme in this part is the interaction between observation and interpretation. Characters collect data, analyze anomalies, and attempt to establish cause and effect relationships. Yet the more information they gather, the more contradictions emerge. Patterns that initially seem logical dissolve upon closer scrutiny. Observations that appear objective are revealed to be influenced by perception and cognitive bias. Tarmashev uses these narrative elements to explore epistemology, questioning how humans know what they know, and how confidence in understanding can be shattered by phenomena beyond experience. By the conclusion of Part 4, the reader is presented with a fully realized sense of the darkness as an active, adaptive, and morally indifferent force. Its presence challenges every assumption, decision, and system in place. The human response is varied but consistently constrained by ignorance, fear, and institutional inefficiency. Characters are pushed to the edge of comprehension, forced to confront not only external danger, but the limitations of their own cognition and social structures. The narrative sets the stage for escalation in subsequent parts. Direct confrontations, ethical conflicts, and the ultimate consequences of prolonged exposure to the darkness are prepared, but the tension remains grounded in realism. Tarmashev's skillful blending of psychological horror, philosophical reflection, and detailed world-building ensures that Part 4 is not merely a bridge between events, but a critical development in the overarching narrative. In summary, Part 4 deepens the exploration of the darkness, emphasizing its physical, psychological, and philosophical dimensions. Characters encounter direct and indirect manifestations of the threat, grapple with cognitive limitations, navigate ethical ambiguity, and witness the breakdown of social trust. The narrative highlights the fragility of human systems in the face of incomprehensible phenomena and prepares the reader for the intensified confrontations and moral dilemmas that will dominate the following parts of the novel. In Part 5 of Darkness, the narrative shifts toward a more intense confrontation with the consequences of human negligence and the incomprehensible nature of the darkness itself. By this stage, the threat is no longer merely mysterious. It has tangible effects on environments, people, and societal structures. The story emphasizes how cumulative ignorance, denial, and the failure to act responsibly amplify disaster. Characters are increasingly forced into moral and practical dilemmas as the narrative blurs the line between survival and complicity. A central focus of this section is the deepening exploration of the darkness's influence on human perception. Individuals experience altered senses, hallucinations, and temporal distortions. Time may seem to stretch indefinitely or compress without warning. Objects appear to shift or duplicate. Shadows move independently. Sounds carry strange echoes, while familiar landmarks may vanish or rearrange themselves. These phenomena unsettle the characters profoundly, forcing them to question not only the world around them, but also their own cognitive reliability. This psychological destabilization is one of Tarmashev's most effective storytelling techniques, creating tension that is both intimate and pervasive. The military operations described in parts further illustrate the limitations of conventional strategies. Troops are deployed into zones where the darkness has already altered physical laws. Plans based on standard procedures fail spectacularly. Equipment malfunctions, navigation becomes impossible, and coordination collapses under the strain of unreliable communications. These failures highlight the vulnerability of human systems and underscore the futility of relying solely on hierarchy and technology when confronting forces that defy comprehension. Ethical and philosophical dilemmas become increasingly central to the narrative. Characters are confronted with choices in which every option carries risk and no outcome is guaranteed. Decisions regarding engagement with the darkness, prioritization of resources, and the protection of civilians illustrate the tension between moral duty and practical necessity. The novel challenges the reader to consider how humans make ethical judgments in situations where traditional frameworks of morality are insufficient or irrelevant. These dilemmas elevate the story from mere thriller to a profound meditation on responsibility, choice, and consequence. Part 5 also explores the effects of prolonged exposure to extreme stress and anomalous phenomena on human cognition and behavior. Soldiers and scientists alike exhibit signs of psychological strain, including obsessive focus, paranoia, and altered perception. Some individuals begin to question the reliability of memory itself, while others retreat into denial or detachment as coping mechanisms. Tarmashev portrays these responses with subtlety, avoiding melodrama while effectively conveying the human cost of encountering incomprehensible forces. A significant sequence in this section involves an interdisciplinary team investigating a region profoundly affected by the darkness. The team observes spatial and temporal distortions, anomalous energy readings, and organic behaviors that defy known biology. Instruments provide inconsistent or contradictory data, and measurements often fail altogether. Attempts to record and analyze the phenomena reveal the limitations of human methodology. This sequence emphasizes the novel's recurring theme, that the world's most significant threats often exceed our ability to measure, understand, or control them. Social consequences are also a critical focus in Part 5. Communities experience growing fear and instability as the effects of the darkness become more visible. Supply chains are disrupted, trust in authorities diminishes, and social cohesion erodes. Civilians react in diverse ways, ranging from altruism and cooperation to hoarding and conflict. Tarmashev uses these responses to illustrate the fragility of social structures under prolonged stress and uncertainty, demonstrating how human behavior adapts, sometimes constructively and sometimes destructively in extreme conditions. Trust, both interpersonal and institutional, continues to deteriorate. Military and scientific teams face challenges in communication and coordination. Mistrust arises as different groups interpret events differently, and conflicting priorities create tension and conflict. The novel emphasizes that cooperation, adaptability, and transparent communication are essential for survival in the face of incomprehensible phenomena, yet human systems are often ill-equipped to maintain these conditions. The darkness itself is depicted as an adaptive, intelligent presence that responds to human action. It manipulates perception, tests cognitive limits, and influences both physical and social environments. This makes it an unconventional antagonist. It is not malicious in a human sense, but it is capable of creating situations that threaten survival, understanding, and societal stability. By portraying the darkness as a force that is neither predictable nor comprehensible, Tarmashev enhances the existential dimension of the narrative, prompting readers to reflect on human limitations and vulnerability. Scientific inquiry continues to play a significant role in this section. Researchers attempt to document, classify, and predict the effects of the darkness, but conventional methods prove inadequate. Instruments fail, data are contradictory, and patterns are only partially recognizable. Tarmashev portrays the scientific struggle realistically, highlighting the tension between the desire to understand and the inherent limitations imposed by both human perception and the phenomena themselves. This reinforces the novel's philosophical themes. Knowledge is provisional, and human understanding is inherently bounded. As events escalate, characters are forced into increasingly direct confrontations with anomalous zones. Operations that begin as reconnaissance or observation often devolve into life-and-death situations, emphasizing the unpredictable and adaptive nature of the darkness. The narrative maintains suspense not through action alone, but through the combination of cognitive uncertainty, moral tension, and environmental hazards. Every decision carries risk, and the consequences of misjudgment are immediate and severe. Part 5 also examines the long-term consequences of exposure to incomprehensible phenomena. Psychological stress, ethical uncertainty, and social fragmentation compound as the narrative progresses. Characters must navigate both external threats and internal instability, balancing survival against professional and personal responsibilities. The interplay of these forces creates a dense, immersive experience for the reader, emphasizing the multifaceted nature of crisis and the interconnectedness of individual, social, and existential dimensions. The novel continues to explore the adaptive nature of the darkness. Its interactions with humans suggest a form of intelligence or strategy, though its motives remain inscrutable. Tarmashev does not anthropomorphize the force, instead portraying it as morally neutral but profoundly effective in challenging human assumptions. This creates a pervasive sense of tension and unpredictability, reinforcing the narrative's existential underpinnings. By the conclusion of Part 5, the cumulative effects of human error, denial, and institutional inadequacy are evident. Characters face increasingly complex challenges with limited resources and unreliable information. The darkness is no longer merely a background threat, it is an active agent influencing events, behavior, and perception. Social structures are under strain, and trust has eroded at every level. The narrative sets the stage for the coming escalation, in which direct confrontations, ethical crises, and existential challenges will intensify. Part 5 succeeds in deepening both the narrative tension and the philosophical stakes. Through detailed character development, complex interactions, and subtle psychological horror, Tarmashev prepares the reader for the climactic events of subsequent parts. The story remains grounded in realism, even as it engages with extraordinary and incomprehensible forces, creating a compelling fusion of speculative fiction, thriller, and philosophical inquiry. In summary, Part 5 emphasizes the adaptive, intelligent, and morally neutral nature of the darkness, the fragility of human systems, the psychological and ethical consequences of prolonged exposure to the unknown, and the erosion of trust and social cohesion. It provides a bridge between the initial exploratory phases of the narrative and the intensified confrontations and moral complexities that will dominate the final sections of the novel. By the time Darkness reaches Part 6, the narrative has transitioned fully into a psychological, philosophical, and existential confrontation. The events depicted no longer revolve merely around external threats or isolated anomalies. Instead, the darkness begins to reshape the inner world of the characters. What once seemed like a distant mystery now becomes an unavoidable presence, influencing thought, perception, and behavior on a profound level. Tarmashev escalates the story not through sudden battles or dramatic twists, but through the gradual realization that the rules governing the world are changing. One of the most striking elements of this section is the development of cognitive instability among individuals who have encountered the darkness repeatedly. Soldiers and researchers begin to question their own memories, uncertain whether their recollections are accurate or distorted. Time loses consistency. Moments repeat or vanish unpredictably. Characters find themselves unsure whether events occurred minutes ago, hours ago, or not at all. This erosion of temporal certainty creates a suffocating psychological tension, forcing individuals to rely on instinct rather than logic. This breakdown of cognitive stability also triggers conflict within teams. When perceptions differ, trust becomes fragile. A soldier who insists that he saw a structure shift shape may be perceived as hallucinating. A scientist who claims to have measured impossible energy fluctuations may be dismissed as mistaken. Yet at the same time, everyone understands that the darkness manipulates perception, making it impossible to determine what is real. This dual uncertainty, both internal and external, is one of Part 6's most powerful narrative engines. In this part of the story, institutional structures begin to collapse more visibly. Communication between agencies becomes unreliable. Reports contradict one another. Classified information is leaked, stolen, or lost. Command chains falter as leaders grapple with conflicting data and psychological fatigue. Some attempt to maintain order by doubling down on secrecy, while others push for transparency, arguing that suppression of information has worsened the situation. The internal struggle between denial and acknowledgement becomes as dangerous as the darkness itself. Tarmashev also expands the philosophical scope of the narrative. Characters debate the nature of consciousness, the limits of human perception, and the responsibility of civilization when faced with forces beyond comprehension. These discussions are not abstract. They emerge naturally from the characters' experiences. A scientist who once believed that all phenomena could be explained rationally now confronts events that defy all known laws. A soldier who trusted in training and discipline now questions whether those tools are meaningful in a world that no longer behaves logically. These reflections deepen the narrative, turning it into more than a survival story. It becomes a meditation on the fragile relationship between humanity and reality. A pivotal sequence in Part 6 involves a multi-unit operation attempting to establish a defensive perimeter around an expanding anomalous zone. Although the mission is planned with precision, the darkness disrupts it before the teams even reach their positions. Navigation systems malfunction, distances shift unpredictably, and units become separated despite maintaining line of sight. Communications break down, with transmissions either delayed, distorted, or replaced by sounds that do not originate from any known source. Some soldiers report hearing voices, familiar, comforting, or commanding, urging them to move in specific directions. Whether these voices are hallucinations or manipulations by the darkness remains unclear. When the units finally regroup, they discover discrepancies in their perceptions. Some describe the landscape as barren, others as overgrown. Some insist that structures appeared and disappeared. The conflicting reports make it impossible for leadership to form a coherent understanding of the situation. The mission is aborted, but the failure underscores a growing realization. The darkness cannot be contained or predicted through conventional means. Human assumptions about space, time, and sensory reliability are breaking down. Social consequences, already severe in earlier parts, intensify dramatically. Civilians experience unexplained phenomena in their homes, workplaces, and public spaces. Panic spreads through communities as anomalies encroach on areas once considered safe. Government attempts to maintain order through controlled information releases, but these efforts backfire as inconsistencies and cover-ups become apparent. Rumors and misinformation proliferate, and public trust erodes completely. People begin to form their own theories, some grounded in science, others in superstition or conspiracy. The fragmentation of belief systems creates conflict between groups, further destabilizing society. Part 6 places particular emphasis on the role of belief and interpretation. When confronted with incomprehensible events, individuals interpret them through personal frameworks. A scientist views anomalies as data points requiring explanation. A soldier sees them as tactical threats. A civilian may interpret them as omens or spiritual signs. These differing interpretations influence behavior, often in contradictory ways. The darkness thus acts as a catalyst not only for physical and cognitive disruption, but also for ideological division. Tarmashev demonstrates how crisis magnifies pre-existing social fault lines, accelerating societal breakdown. Another key moment in this part of the story involves a small team attempting to study the biological effects of the darkness on living organisms. Early observations revealed mutations, behavioral changes, and destabilized metabolic processes. But in this phase, the team discovers that the darkness does not simply alter biology, it alters the relationship between organisms and their environment. Plants respond to stimuli that do not exist. Animals react to invisible threats. Microorganisms behave in patterns that defy evolutionary logic. The team speculates that the darkness is not modifying organisms individually, but reshaping the fundamental principles of biological interaction. This discovery has profound implications. If the darkness can influence the basic rules governing life, then its spread represents not merely a physical threat, but an existential one. Species may lose their ecological roles, environments may become incompatible with known forms of life, and natural systems may collapse entirely. The scientists attempt to document these changes, but their data is inconsistent, corrupted, or unreadable. The conclusions they reach are alarming, but they struggle to communicate their findings to authorities who still cling to outdated frameworks of interpretation. Psychological deterioration continues to escalate among those closest to the anomalies. Some individuals experience intrusive thoughts or sudden emotional shifts. Others develop an uncanny sense of being watched or followed, even in areas with no known anomalous activity. A few begin to question whether their personality or identity remains intact. They wonder whether the darkness is influencing not just perception, but cognition, memory, and sense of self. These introspective struggles create some of the most emotionally intense moments in the narrative. Part 6 also highlights the theme of isolation. Teams in the field often find themselves cut off from communication, both literally and psychologically. Even when they return to safe zones, they feel disconnected from others. Their experiences are too strange, too difficult to articulate, and too likely to be dismissed. This isolation breeds frustration, resentment, and despair. Some lash out, others withdraw, and a few become dangerously obsessed with finding meaning in the chaos. Tarmashev uses these psychological fractures to underscore how crises affect the human mind in deeply personal ways. The darkness's presence becomes increasingly active in this section. It does not act like a predator or enemy. It does not attack or retreat in recognizable patterns. Instead, it reshapes reality, tests human limits, and forces individuals to confront the boundaries of their understanding. Its indifference is more terrifying than any malevolent intent could be. Characters begin to grasp that they are not fighting an entity, but an incomprehensible alteration of existence itself. As societal collapse accelerates, some government units attempt to coordinate evacuation zones, but the effort is undermined by unreliable data and unpredictable anomalies. Entire regions become inaccessible or hostile without warning. Attempts to establish safe routes fail as landmarks shift or disappear. Civilian panic grows as resources dwindle and trust evaporates. People begin to flee blindly, often into greater danger. The chaos reveals the fragility of civilization. When foundational assumptions break down, systems collapse rapidly. By the end of Part 6, humanity stands on the brink of total disintegration. Institutions have lost credibility. Communication has become unreliable. Individuals question their own senses. The darkness continues to expand without regard for human effort. The story builds toward an inevitable realization. Survival may depend not on defeating the darkness, but on understanding the profound limitations of human perception and adapting to a world that no longer follows familiar rules. Part 6 concludes with a profound sense of dread, not because of imminent destruction, but because of the existential implications. Characters understand that they are not merely facing danger. They are witnessing the unraveling of the reality they once took for granted. Tarmashev uses this moment to prepare the narrative for its most intense and philosophically challenging sections, where the final confrontation with the darkness will extend beyond physical survival into questions of identity, meaning, and the nature of existence itself. Part 7 marks a shift in the tone of the narrative. By this point, the characters are no longer trying to resist the darkness in a traditional sense. They have realized that it cannot be fought with force, contained with barriers, or understood through conventional science. Instead, they begin to face a far more difficult challenge, accepting that everything they believe about the world might be fundamentally incomplete or wrong. This part of the story focuses heavily on introspection, on the collapse of internal boundaries, and on the confrontation with truths that human minds may not be built to comprehend. One of the core themes in Part 7 is the idea of perception as a fragile construct. For most of human history, people have trusted their senses implicitly. They believed that what they saw, heard, felt, and remembered was real. The darkness destroys this assumption. Characters struggle with the realization that their senses are unreliable and that their thoughts may no longer be entirely their own. This leads to a deeper philosophical question. If perception cannot be trusted, what remains of identity? In several key scenes, individuals experience vivid sensations that contradict external evidence. A soldier may feel a burning heat even though his environment is freezing. A scientist may hear distant voices whispering her name, though no one is there. A civilian might recall a childhood memory with perfect clarity, only to discover that the memory never happened. These distortions create fractures in their understanding of themselves. When the boundary between internal and external reality dissolves, the characters must confront the possibility that their minds are becoming extensions of the darkness. This part of the story emphasizes the increasing influence of the anomalies on consciousness. People begin to notice thoughts that feel intrusive, as if implanted. They question whether their impulses originate within themselves or from some external force. Some try to resist these thoughts, while others believe that embracing them may lead to understanding. This tension between resistance and surrender forms a crucial emotional thread throughout Part 7. The darkness also begins to influence dreams in this section. Characters experience visions filled with impossible geometry, endless corridors, shifting landscapes, and beings that do not resemble anything known. The dreams feel more real than waking life. Time behaves differently within them. Some individuals wake up convinced they spent weeks or months inside the dream, even though only minutes have passed. Others wake up with new knowledge schematics, languages, or concepts they could not have learned through natural means. Whether this knowledge is accurate, dangerous, or purely deceptive remains unclear. These dreams serve a narrative purpose as well. They reveal fragments of information about the nature of the darkness, though never in a straightforward manner. Instead of providing answers, the dreams deepen the sense of mystery. They suggest that the darkness operates on levels far beyond the limits of human understanding. It may not be hostile, at least not in the conventional sense. It may simply exist according to rules that humanity cannot grasp. This realization terrifies some characters, while others find a strange sense of calm in the acceptance of incomprehensibility. Meanwhile, the social and political landscape continues to deteriorate. Entire regions are now abandoned, either because of direct anomalous activity or because of the psychological breakdown of their populations. Governments attempt to establish new centers of control, but their efforts are undermined by failing infrastructure, mass panic, and widespread mistrust. Some military units fracture into independent factions, each convinced that their interpretation of the crisis is correct. Civilians form cult-like groups that worship the darkness, believing it to be a form of higher intelligence or cosmic truth. These groups engage in rituals, hoping to establish communication with the anomalies. Their actions often lead to catastrophic consequences. At the same time, other factions adopt hyper-rational approaches, refusing to acknowledge any emotional or philosophical implications. They attempt to treat the darkness as a solvable problem, something that can be eliminated through brute force or scientific advancement. Their efforts are rooted in desperation and blind faith. Despite the mounting evidence that traditional methodologies are useless, these groups cling to them as a source of psychological stability. Their refusal to adapt ultimately accelerates their downfall. Tarmashev explores the danger of ideological rigidity through these factions. In times of crisis, people often cling to familiar beliefs, even when those beliefs are no longer applicable. The darkness magnifies this tendency, making people more extreme, more isolated, and more irrational. The conflict between factions becomes as destructive as the anomalies themselves. Violence erupts in regions that were once stable. Propaganda spreads uncontrollably. Fear becomes the dominant force shaping society. Within this chaos, a small group of researchers and soldiers begins to piece together a radical new interpretation of the darkness. They propose that it is not an invader, but a manifestation of an underlying structure of reality that was previously hidden. According to their theory, the universe contains layers or dimensions that coexist with the physical world, and the darkness represents a breach or merging of these layers. This does not make the situation less dangerous. If anything, it becomes more terrifying, but it changes the perspective. The darkness is not an anomaly in the universe. Humanity is. This theory gains traction among characters who have experienced profound distortions of reality. They recognize that the anomalies follow patterns that are not chaotic, but simply unfamiliar. This recognition creates a strange sense of purpose. Instead of fighting the darkness, some characters believe they must learn to interpret it, even if doing so risks their sanity. They begin to experiment with controlled exposure to anomalies, attempting to document the changes they experience. These experiments reveal glimpses of new forms of logic, new relationships between physical and mental processes, and new ways of perceiving time. However, these insights come at a cost. Many who attempt to understand the darkness suffer mental deterioration. Some lose their ability to distinguish between thought and perception. Others become emotionally numb or hypersensitive. A few disappear entirely, absorbed into anomalous zones that swallow them without a trace. The pursuit of knowledge becomes a dangerous gamble, with no guarantee that the insights gained will lead to survival. Part 7 builds towards several pivotal events that reshape the direction of the story. One such event involves a research outpost located near a stable anomaly, a rare phenomenon, because most anomalies fluctuate wildly. This outpost has become a hub of activity, drawing scientists, soldiers, and even civilians seeking answers. The team stationed there continues to document the anomaly's behavior, attempting to identify consistent patterns. Their work provides some of the most compelling evidence that the darkness operates according to its own form of logic. But then, without warning, the stable anomaly destabilizes. The outpost is engulfed in a wave of distortion. Buildings stretch and collapse simultaneously. Time fragments. People find themselves duplicated, erased, or merged into the landscape. Communication cuts off abruptly. When rescue teams arrive, they find no survivors. The outpost has become a twisted sculpture of metal, stone, and organic matter. The failure of this outpost sends shockwaves through the remaining institutions, crushing any lingering hope of understanding the darkness through controlled study. This catastrophic event leads to new political tensions. Some leaders argue that all research initiatives must be halted immediately, claiming that further study only increases the spread of anomalies. Others insist that understanding the darkness is the only path to survival. The resulting conflict divides entire nations, leading to new alliances and new enemies. The collapse of the outpost becomes a symbol of humanity's desperation and its inability to control its own fate. The emotional core of Part 7 centers on the characters who struggle to maintain their humanity in the face of overwhelming uncertainty. They grapple with loss, not only of loved ones, but of their own identities. They struggle to find meaning in a world where meaning itself seems to be dissolving. Some find strength in small acts of kindness. Others cling to memories, even when those memories may be false. A few discover a quiet acceptance, recognizing that fear is natural but not always useful. The darkness continues to expand, though the rate of expansion fluctuates unpredictably. Some regions experience temporary stability, while others collapse into chaos without warning. Humanity becomes increasingly fragmented. But despite the despair, a small sense of determination persists among some characters. They believe that survival, whether physical, mental, or spiritual, requires a new way of thinking, one that transcends the limitations of human perception. Part 7 ends on a note of quiet tension. The characters understand that the world they knew is gone. The structures that once provided security, governments, science, communities, even the human mind, have been reshaped or destroyed. But beneath the fear and uncertainty lies a question that will shape the rest of the story. If the darkness cannot be resisted, can it be understood? And if it cannot be understood, can humanity evolve in a way that allows it to coexist with forces beyond its comprehension? This question lingers as Part 7 concludes, setting the stage for the next phase of the narrative, one that will push the characters to confront not only the external anomalies, but the deepest layers of their own consciousness. Part 8 represents a turning point in the narrative. By now, humanity has lost the illusion that the darkness is just a temporary crisis or an external enemy. It is clear that the world itself is changing in ways that cannot be reversed or contained. Institutions have collapsed, social structures have fragmented, and individual identity has become unstable. In this part, the story shifts from reactive survival to something more introspective and transformational. Characters begin to realize that what is happening is not just the end of the old world, but the beginning of something entirely new. Whether this new reality is survivable remains uncertain. One of the central themes of Part 8 is acceptance, though not in the sense of surrender. Acceptance here means acknowledging that the rules have changed. Those who cling to old frameworks suffer the most. They attempt to rebuild governments, enforce old laws, or restore broken science, but their efforts fail repeatedly. The darkness has altered the fundamental structure of the environment, and the methods humanity relied on for centuries no longer apply. This part shows how civilizations collapse not only from external pressure, but from the inability to adapt intellectually and emotionally. In contrast, smaller groups of people begin to experiment with new ways of thinking. Some form communities that prioritize mental resilience over physical safety. Others attempt to develop new communication methods, new rituals, or new emotional frameworks to survive the constant uncertainty. These attempts may seem irrational from a traditional perspective, but in a world where logic itself is changing, they become surprisingly effective. People discover that flexible thinking, emotional openness, and even creative imagination can help buffer the psychological impact of the darkness. A strange paradox emerges. The more unpredictable the world becomes, the more valuable the human capacity for imagination becomes. Part 8 goes deeper into the inner experiences of those affected by the anomalies. Emotional states become exaggerated or distorted. Someone experiencing sadness may feel an overwhelming wave of despair that threatens to erase their personality. Someone feeling curiosity may become consumed by an obsessive desire to enter an anomaly zone. Fear becomes paralyzing, joy becomes dangerous, and anger becomes explosive. These emotional amplifications are not random. They seem to reflect the darkness interacting with the inner world of the individual. It is as if emotions themselves become part of the environment, capable of influencing physical reality. This leads some characters to wonder whether the darkness is responding to human consciousness or whether consciousness is adapting to the darkness. Some scenes depict emotions manifesting as subtle distortions in space shadows, moving in response to fear, colors shifting during moments of hope, sounds emerging from silence during moments of confusion. These phenomena are not hallucinations. They leave measurable traces, suggesting that the barrier between thought and reality is thinning. This raises profound questions about the nature of consciousness. If thoughts can influence the environment, then the human mind may not be merely a passive observer, but an active participant in shaping reality. A significant event in Part 8 involves a group of survivors who attempt a dangerous experiment. They believe that by entering an anomaly zone, while maintaining a specific emotional state, they can influence the behavior of the darkness and possibly gain new insights. The emotional state they choose is calm acceptance, not fear, not excitement, but a deep, centered stillness. Their reasoning is that fear seems to destabilize anomalies, while intense curiosity or aggression seems to provoke unpredictable reactions. If the darkness responds to internal states, then approaching it with calmness might reveal something new. This experiment results in one of the most striking sequences in the story. When the group enters the anomaly, they experience a synchronized shift in perception. Their surroundings transform into a fluid landscape that reflects their collective mental state. Colors pulse gently, structures ripple, and time flows in soft waves. They discover that when they remain emotionally steady, the anomaly remains stable. But when one member feels a surge of anxiety, the environment twists abruptly, creating dangerous distortions. This realization confirms their theory. The darkness is influenced by consciousness, perhaps even shaped by it. However, the experiment quickly turns catastrophic. Maintaining emotional stability proves nearly impossible in such a surreal environment. Someone panics, and the anomaly collapses. The group is scattered. Some emerge days later, physically unharmed but mentally shattered. Others simply disappear. The survivors report that the anomaly felt like a mirror, not a mirror of appearance, but a mirror of the soul. It reflected their deepest fears, desires, and memories in symbolic, sometimes monstrous forms. The experience leaves them with lingering psychological scars, but also new insights. They conclude that the darkness may not be hostile but simply indifferent, responding automatically to mental and emotional input. This changes the entire understanding of the phenomenon. Meanwhile, the rest of the world continues to deteriorate. Civilization shrinks into isolated enclaves, each with its own interpretation of the darkness. Some communities adopt spiritual practices, believing that meditation or prayer can protect them. Others turn to extreme skepticism, refusing to acknowledge any anomaly unless it can be measured repeatedly. There are even groups that view the darkness as an evolutionary force, believing that humanity must merge with it to survive. These differing views create new conflicts, sometimes violent, as each group believes it has found the correct path. Tarmashev uses these divisions to show how crisis amplifies existing differences in human belief systems. The darkness becomes a canvas onto which people project their worldviews. A rationalist sees a scientific anomaly. A mystic sees a revelation. A cynic sees a threat. A hopeful person sees an opportunity. None of these interpretations are entirely correct, yet none are entirely wrong. The darkness does not fit into any single framework. It transcends all of them. Part 8 also delves into the psychological toll of prolonged exposure to incomprehensibility. Characters begin to experience dissociation, feeling detached from their bodies or surroundings. Some suffer from temporal dislocation, experiencing events out of order. Others develop dual memories, two conflicting versions of the same event. These experiences challenge the continuity of the self. If memory is unreliable and perception unstable, then the sense of a unified identity begins to fragment. One scene poignantly depicts a character writing daily notes to remind himself who he is, only to discover that the notes change overnight. The collapse of identity leads some individuals to embrace new forms of self-definition. Instead of relying on memory or logic, they define themselves through choices or values, through deliberate acts of kindness, courage, or curiosity. These self-defined identities become surprisingly resilient. They are not tied to the stability of the world, but to internal decisions. This becomes one of the emerging survival strategies, to anchor oneself not in the external world, which is unstable, but in internal values, which remain constant. It is a philosophical shift that resonates deeply throughout Part 8. Another powerful sequence in this part involves a group of survivors encountering a massive anomaly that behaves differently from all previous ones. Unlike the chaotic distortions seen elsewhere, this anomaly appears structured, almost architectural. It contains repeating patterns, symmetrical curves, and rhythmic pulses of energy. Some interpret it as a construct, a message, or a gateway. Others believe it is a natural formation shaped by unknown laws. The group attempts to explore it, noting that it reacts to their emotional states in subtle ways. When they feel fear, the structure darkens. When they feel curiosity, it emits light. When they feel unity, it stabilizes. Their exploration leads to a stunning discovery. At the heart of the anomaly, time behaves like a fluid. Moments expand, contract, or fold in on themselves. The group witnesses echoes of the past and glimpses of possible futures. These temporal distortions do not provide clear answers, but offer hints that the darkness may be connected to the fundamental fabric of reality. The anomaly becomes a symbolic embodiment of the story's central themes: perception, consciousness, time, and the interconnectedness of all things. However, the stability of the anomaly is short-lived. Emotional discord among the group triggers instability. The structure collapses, and only a few members escape. Their experience, though traumatic, becomes crucial in the narrative. They bring back knowledge, not scientific data, but experiential understanding that influences the remaining survivors. They describe the anomaly as a place where reality becomes aware of itself, a place where the boundaries between observer and observed dissolve. The emotional core of Part 8 revolves around the characters' attempts to find meaning in a world where meaning seems to be dissolving. Some find purpose in helping others. Some find purpose in seeking truth. Some find purpose in simply surviving another day. The darkness forces them to confront the most fundamental questions. What is reality? What is consciousness? What does it mean to be human when the world no longer follows human logic? By the end of Part 8, humanity is reduced to scattered groups, each trying to navigate the new reality in its own way. The world is no longer recognizable, but a quiet determination persists among a few individuals. They believe that somewhere within the chaos lies a new form of understanding, something that may allow humanity not only to survive but to evolve. Part 8 ends with a sense of anticipation, as though the characters are standing on the threshold of a new stage in the story, one that will push the boundaries of consciousness, identity, and existence even further. Part 9 marks the beginning of a profound internal transformation, not just for individual characters, but for humanity as a whole. By this stage of the story, the external world has already been reshaped beyond recognition. Landscapes shift unpredictably, time behaves irregularly, and physical laws fluctuate. The darkness has permeated every aspect of existence. What now becomes clear is that the final battle will not be fought in the outside world. It will take place within the human mind. The conflict is not between people in the darkness, but between outdated human perception and a new form of reality that demands a different way of thinking. The survivors who remain scattered across isolated enclaves begin to experience moments of clarity amid the chaos. These moments come unexpectedly, like flashes of insight that reveal patterns hidden within the anomalies. They see correlations between emotional states and environmental shifts, between thought patterns and the behavior of the darkness. These insights suggest that the anomalies are not random, but part of a larger structure, a vast interconnected system that human minds can barely interpret. For some, this realization is terrifying. For others, it is strangely comforting. One of the central developments in Part 9 involves the emergence of a new form of communication among individuals exposed to the anomalies. This communication is not verbal or sensory in the traditional sense. Instead, it resembles an empathic exchange, an intuitive sharing of feelings, perceptions, or fragments of thought. It occurs spontaneously, often during moments of heightened stress or emotional vulnerability. Survivors begin to sense each other's fear, hope, confusion, or determination without speaking. This form of connection does not always function and cannot be controlled, but when it does appear, it offers a glimpse of a new form of human interaction. This phenomenon leads to a groundbreaking realization: the darkness may be dissolving the barriers that isolate individual consciousness. It may be revealing that the separation between minds is an illusion created by human perception. Characters who experience these connections are overcome by a mix of emotions. Some feel violated, uncomfortable with the loss of privacy. Others feel liberated, relieved to discover they are not alone in their struggle. This shared consciousness becomes one of the emerging survival mechanisms. In moments of unity, anomalies stabilize temporarily. In moments of discord, they intensify. The idea of unity becomes a recurring theme in Part 9. The survivors begin to understand that their internal states, thoughts, emotions, and interactions directly influence the external world. This reverses the traditional relationship between humans and the environment. Instead of adapting to the environment adapts to them. But this adaptation is not benevolent. It is neutral. When fear dominates, the world becomes hostile. When determination prevails, the world becomes navigable. When unity emerges, the world becomes momentarily coherent. This revelation challenges everything the characters once believed about reality. It forces them to question the notion of an external, objective world. If reality responds to consciousness, then consciousness may be the primary force shaping existence. The implications are staggering. It means that survival depends not on weapons or strategies, but on emotional stability, mental discipline, and social cohesion. The human mind becomes the battlefield, and every thought becomes meaningful. A significant event in Part 9 involves a group of survivors who attempt to harness these newfound insights. They gather in a location where the anomalies appear particularly responsive to internal states. Their goal is to create a controlled environment through collective focus and emotional synchronization. This experiment is risky, but they believe it may provide a breakthrough in understanding the nature of the darkness. The group begins by focusing on a shared memory, a moment from the past that evokes unity, hope, or comfort. As they concentrate, the environment around them shifts subtly. Colors become warmer, sounds become clearer, and the distortions that typically plague the area recede. For a brief moment, the survivors experience a sense of stability. They feel connected, synchronized, and empowered. It is as if they have created a small island of coherence in the midst of chaos. But maintaining this state proves nearly impossible. Individual fears and doubts begin to surface. Someone remembers a traumatic loss. Someone else experiences a surge of anger. These emotional disruptions cause the environment to destabilize. The anomalies pulse violently, and the group is thrown into confusion. The experiment collapses, but not before revealing a crucial truth. Collective mental states can shape reality, but only if individuals can transcend their internal conflicts. Unity is powerful, but fragile. This realization becomes the emotional center of Part 9. Characters grapple with the difficulty of achieving unity in a world filled with fear and trauma. They confront their own psychological wounds, grief, guilt, anger, despair, because they now understand that these emotions do not just affect their inner world, they influence the physical world around them. Healing becomes more than a personal journey. It becomes a necessity for survival. The narrative also follows individuals who reject this path. Some refuse to engage in collective emotional work, believing it to be futile or dangerous. They isolate themselves, attempting to shield their minds from the influence of others. But isolation becomes deadly. Those who withdraw from human connection experience more severe distortions. Their perception fractures, and their sense of identity dissolves. They become vulnerable to the full force of the darkness, which overwhelms them without resistance. These tragic arcs demonstrate that survival is no longer an individual endeavor. Another significant development in Part 9 is the emergence of a new type of anomaly, one that appears to be influenced by collective memory. These anomalies manifest as fragments of the past that overlay the present. Survivors walk through landscapes that fluctuate between their current ruined state and vivid recreations of how they once looked. In some cases, the anomalies reflect personal memories, showing scenes from individual lives. In others, they reflect shared history, recreating moments from the collective human experience. These memory anomalies raise new questions. Are they projections created by consciousness? Are they remnants of a past reality trying to reassert itself? Or are they expressions of the darkness attempting to communicate? Characters struggle to interpret these manifestations, unsure whether they represent hope, warning, or deception. Some find comfort in the familiar scenes, while others fear that they are being lured into psychological traps. Part 9 dives deeper into the emotional complexity of these experiences. One particularly poignant sequence involves a character who encounters an anomaly that recreates the home he lost years ago. The environment looks, sounds, and even smells exactly as he remembers. For a moment, he is overwhelmed by nostalgia. But as he explores the space, he notices subtle inconsistencies, objects in the wrong place, shadows that do not match their sources. The anomaly is not a perfect recreation, but a reflection shaped by memory, emotion, and perhaps the influence of the darkness. The scene becomes a meditation on the nature of memory itself. Is memory a reliable record, or is it a construction shaped by emotion and perception? These memory anomalies serve as metaphors for the central conflict of Part 9. Humanity is caught between what it remembers and what it must become. The past offers comfort, but also traps. The future is uncertain but full of potential. To survive, characters must let go of their rigid attachment to the past while preserving the values that define them. It is a delicate balance, and not everyone succeeds. Part 9 also explores the limits of human cognition. Some characters begin to perceive patterns or concepts that their minds cannot fully grasp. They describe these experiences as overwhelming, like trying to comprehend an entire library in a single moment. Some interpret these moments as revelations. Others view them as psychological breakdowns. The story does not offer easy answers. This ambiguity reflects the broader theme. The human mind is evolving, but evolution is not a smooth process. It is messy, painful, and unpredictable. As Part 9 progresses, the tone shifts from despair to a cautious sense of possibility. The survivors realize that the darkness is not simply destroying the world. It is transforming it. The transformation is violent and incomprehensible, but it contains the seeds of something new. Characters begin to wonder whether the darkness is an evolutionary force, one that is pushing humanity to expand its consciousness, to transcend its limitations, to perceive reality in a fundamentally different way. This idea does not make the situation less dangerous, but it offers a glimmer of hope. If the darkness represents a higher or deeper layer of reality, then humanity may have the potential to adapt to it. The final chapters of Part 9 explore this emerging sense of purpose. Survivors start to form new communities based not on old systems of power or ideology, but on emotional resonance, mutual understanding, and shared intention. These communities are fragile but resilient. They demonstrate that even in the midst of chaos, humans can find ways to connect, cooperate, and create meaning. Part 1 concludes with a quiet but powerful realization. The greatest threat may not be the darkness itself, but the human inability to let go of outdated ways of thinking. Those who cling to old definitions of reality are consumed by the anomalies. Those who embrace new possibilities, no matter how frightening, find new paths forward. This sets the stage for the final part of the story, in which the boundary between humanity and the darkness becomes so thin that the final outcome will depend entirely on the evolution of human consciousness. Part X brings the story to a level of intensity and philosophical depth that surpasses everything that came before it. By this stage, humanity is standing on the edge of an existential threshold. The old world has collapsed, not through war or catastrophe in the traditional sense, but through the gradual dissolution of everything that once defined reality. The darkness is no longer an external force. It has become intertwined with human consciousness. The final questions are no longer about survival in the physical sense, but about the very nature of existence, identity, and evolution. The world at this point is a fragmented landscape of shifting anomalies, memory constructs, and pockets of unstable reality, where the laws of physics fluctuate endlessly. Time flows in inconsistent patterns. Sometimes minutes stretch into hours, and sometimes entire days vanish in an instant. People who still cling to linear perception are overwhelmed. Those who can navigate these distortions intuitively begin to develop new cognitive abilities. These abilities are not superpowers in the traditional sense. Rather, they are extensions of perception, heightened intuition, emotional resonance, and the ability to interpret subtle shifts in the anomalies. Part X begins by following a small group of survivors who have managed to adapt mentally and emotionally to the new world. They are not immune to the influence of the darkness, but they have learned to move with it instead of resisting. This group has become the focal point of the narrative, not because of their strength, but because of their evolving perception. They understand that the darkness responds to consciousness, and that survival depends on internal harmony rather than external control. Their journey becomes symbolic of humanity's final attempt to understand what is happening. The first major sequence in Part X involves the group entering a region where reality has collapsed into a mosaic of overlapping timelines. They witness fragments of the past, the future, and alternate versions of the present layered together like transparent sheets. These overlapping realities interact in unpredictable ways. In one moment, they see a ruined cityscape. In the next, the buildings appear intact as they were decades ago. Then the same landscape dissolves into a field of light patterns that defy interpretation. The group realizes that this region represents a convergence point, a place where the boundaries between past, present, and future have thinned to the point of merging. As they move through this unstable terrain, they begin to experience intrusive memories, not their own, but fragments from other people, possibly even from alternate versions of themselves. These memories appear like echoes in their minds. Some are mundane, others traumatic. The boundaries between self and other begin to dissolve. This merging of memory raises profound questions about the nature of individuality. If memories can be shared or exchanged, then identity becomes fluid. The survivors struggle to maintain their sense of self, anchoring themselves through deliberate focus on their values, intentions, and emotional core. In this environment, the group encounters a structure unlike any anomaly they have seen before. It appears simultaneously organic and geometric, as if grown and constructed at the same time. The structure pulses gently, emitting patterns of light that resonate with their emotional states. When they feel fear, the lights flicker violently. When they feel curiosity, the structure becomes more transparent, revealing intricate layers within. This interaction confirms their suspicion that the anomaly is sensitive to consciousness. It may even be a form of communication. When the group approaches the structure, they are overwhelmed by a sudden wave of sensory input. They perceive not through their eyes or ears, but through their entire being. Colors, sounds, sensations, and emotions blend together into a single sensory tapestry. It feels as though the structure is reading them, analyzing their thoughts, memories, and intentions. This experience brings them to the brink of cognitive overload. Some fall to their knees, struggling to maintain coherence. Others feel a strange sense of peace, as if they are merging with something vast and incomprehensible. Inside the structure, they encounter a phenomenon that challenges their understanding of existence. They experience a simultaneous awareness of multiple perspectives, as if seeing through many eyes at once. They feel emotions that are not theirs. They perceive concepts that do not fit into any human language. The structure seems to reveal the interconnectedness of all things. Time, space, consciousness, and matter are shown not as separate entities, but as different expressions of a deeper underlying reality. This revelation is overwhelming, but it hints at the true nature of the darkness. It is not an invader. It is a fundamental aspect of reality that has become visible due to a shift in cosmic conditions. This experience changes the group profoundly. They begin to understand that the darkness is not a threat in the traditional sense. It is a force that exposes the limitations of human perception. The fear it evokes comes not from hostility, but from the inability of the human mind to process its true nature. Some members of the group interpret this revelation as a sign that humanity is being pushed, perhaps forcibly, toward a new stage of evolution. Others feel deep resistance, fearing that this transformation means the end of humanity as they know it. The group leaves the structure changed but deeply conflicted. They carry within them a new understanding, but this understanding is incomplete and difficult to articulate. They communicate using fragmented descriptions, metaphors, and emotional resonance. Words are no longer sufficient to describe their experiences. This inability to communicate becomes one of the central tensions of Part X. Those who have not undergone similar experiences cannot understand them. Miscommunication leads to fear and distrust, creating new divisions among the remaining survivors. Meanwhile, the anomalies continue to evolve. Some regions become more stable, forming environments that seem almost welcoming. Others become deadly, collapsing without warning and erasing everything within them. The patterns of these fluctuations suggest that the darkness is responding to collective human consciousness on a global scale. Areas with concentrated fear become volatile. Areas with emerging cooperation or unity experience temporary stability. This indicates that the internal emotional climate of humanity as a whole now shapes the physical world. The implications are staggering. Humanity is no longer living in a world governed by external laws, but in a world shaped by its own collective psyche. This leads to a dramatic shift in the dynamics of survival. Communities that foster emotional harmony experience fewer distortions and more stable environments. Communities driven by fear, anger, or division collapse quickly. The survivors begin to understand that emotional evolution is not optional, it is necessary. This creates a dichotomy between those who embrace this new reality and those who resist it. The resistance groups argue that abandoning traditional forms of perception is equivalent to surrendering humanity. They cling to old beliefs, old habits, and old structures, even as these structures crumble around them. Their fear accelerates their downfall. One of the most powerful sequences in Part X involves a final confrontation, not with a physical enemy, but with the psychological limitations of the human mind. The group is forced into a situation where they must confront their deepest fears, traumas, and unresolved conflicts. These internal struggles manifest in the environment around them as shifting anomalies. A moment of personal guilt may cause the landscape to fracture. A moment of denial may summon a distortion that threatens to consume them. This sequence is both a metaphor and a literal representation of the core message. The greatest danger lies inside, not outside. As the group confronts their internal challenges, they begin to experience a profound transformation. Their minds expand beyond individual identity. They develop the ability to perceive emotional and cognitive patterns in others. They can sense the collective emotional state of a community. They can influence anomalies through focused intention. This is not magic, but the result of a deeper synchronization between consciousness and reality. They begin to operate in a new cognitive mode, one that sees the world not as a collection of separate objects, but as an interconnected web of relationships. This emerging ability becomes the key to navigating the final stages of the darkness. The survivors who embrace this transformation move toward a new form of existence. Those who resist it fall victim to their own fragmented perception. Part X explores this dichotomy with emotional depth and philosophical clarity. It is not a simple battle between good and evil, but a struggle between evolution and stagnation, between openness and fear, between unity and isolation. In the final chapters of Part X, humanity stands at a crossroads. The physical world is almost unrecognizable, but the emotional and cognitive landscape holds new possibilities. The survivors realize that the darkness is neither enemy nor ally. It is a catalyst and evolutionary force that reveals the true nature of consciousness. The story closes on a moment of profound ambiguity. The characters understand that the future will not resemble the past. They stand on the threshold of a new existence, one that they cannot fully comprehend. The ending is not triumphant but contemplative. It suggests that survival will require not strength or intelligence, but the courage to perceive reality in a new way. Part X ends with a sense of quiet anticipation, setting the stage for the final reflections and philosophical conclusions that follow, where the boundaries between self, reality, and existence dissolve completely. When I close the final page of the first book of Darkness, I'm left with a feeling that is difficult to describe. On the surface, this is a story about a catastrophic threat, an unknown, expanding anomaly that shatters the familiar world. But beneath that surface, the book reads like a warning, not about the darkness itself, but about the human weaknesses that allow such a disaster to unfold unchecked. And the more I think about it, the more I realize the true horror of this story isn't the anomaly. It's us. Throughout the book, Tarmashev shows that the collapse of civilization doesn't begin with the first appearance of the darkness. It begins much earlier, with complacency, corruption, short-sightedness, and the quiet erosion of responsibility. Humanity fails long before the threat becomes visible. By the time the darkness arrives, the system is already terminally fragile. There's something profoundly unsettling about that idea. The greatest danger isn't the unknown. The greatest danger is that we aren't ready for the unknown, emotionally, intellectually, or morally. The first book seems to ask a very simple but very terrifying question. What happens when humanity finally encounters something it cannot buy, ignore, manipulate, or destroy with its familiar tools? The answer is equally simple. It collapses. Not because the enemy is too powerful, but because humanity has made itself weak through years of mismanagement, internal division, and blind faith in the permanence of its own civilization. The darkness in this sense is just a mirror. It reflects everything that was already broken inside humanity, everything we refuse to see, and I think that's what makes the first book so powerful. It's not a monster story, it's a diagnostic report. The final chapters don't offer hope, they offer clarity. And clarity in this case is terrifying. But this is just the beginning. If the first book is about collapse, then the second book is about something far more complicated. The hidden layers of guilt, the political games behind the scenes, and the question of whether humanity deserves saving at all. And with that, I step into the next part of the story,